Hey, everybody. I have Glenn Sunshine on the podcast today. And we have an interesting story, an interesting theme here. And the reason I invited Glenn on is that, and I should just preface this, is we've never met. This is our first time talking, but we've been in contact with each other many, many years via the internet here and there. And there was, some communication back in the day. And then I think it was 8 years ago, I got a letter from Glenn where he talked about the impact our research, our approach on looking at fear and how to kind of look more carefully and closely at the psychology of fear and how that influences our behavior and our choices. And he wrote this like amazing letter, which I actually want to read a part of it, where it was. And I don't know. I sent it to you last night, Glenn, because I don't know if you even remembered. Obviously you remember writing it, but it was like I'm stumbling around here because, again, this is unrehearsed, unscripted, but I keep that letter with me and I read it at a lot of our training, our train the trainer programs, trying to instill and inspire in people that what we do is way more than just how to palm strike somebody in the face. That the physical expression of self-defense is the least important element, in my opinion. It's the ability to manage fear and look at fear, get to know fear, KNOW fear, and to teach people that you won't even theoretically be able to defend yourself if you don't mobilize yourself. And that is this relationship between the cognitive brain, the reptilian brain, amygdala, limbic system, and all that stuff. And I'm not going to read the whole letter to you, but one of the lines here, I can't even begin to tell you how much an impact your materials had on my kids. And you reference it must be over 10 years now that I ordered the original. I'm guessing it was the Cerebral Self-Defense Mental Edge tape. And we released that we released that in 1986 as part of the Panther production videos. And then we did an audio tape, I think early in the 90s and early 90s. And then you continued here that they're all like doing great as far as traveling the world and approaching, challenges in life. And what I loved most, because it's something I said recently in a podcast, was I find myself particularly grateful for the very practical ways you've helped my kids to cope and develop skills in dealing with life that I wish I had had the opportunity to learn at their age. And I'm reading that sideways. Hopefully it came out okay. But what I got out of that was, one, I go, wow, I help raise Glenn's kids. Like, I don't even have pictures of them in my wallet, that tongue in cheek there. But you said something there was the opportunity for you to learn this stuff. And it's something that I had this epiphany as well as my system has evolved and matured, and I get emails like this. I get emails I got an email from a dad saying using psychobehavior in the fear management, he helped get his teenage daughter off of antidepressants. Another mom helping her kids overcome their fear of swimming in the water. And I'm like blown away by this stuff. And I remember saying recently that I, serendipitously developed a system I wish somebody had taught me when I was 12 or 13 or 14. And so I want to turn this over to you. You've been sitting there patiently as I just kind of reminisce and ramble here. But, if you want to just jump in or share, your background in terms of your passion for martial arts and how you arrived at this and just how you've been able to integrate it, but obviously as a parent and other aspects of your life.
Yeah, sure. I am, my day job is I'm a college professor. But I have an avocation in the martial arts. I studied multiple different arts. And when I arrived in Connecticut, I was sort of stumbling around trying to find a school to plug into. Nothing that I had worked with prior to this was actually available in Connecticut. So I was looking online for some possible online training things, and I came across your work, Tony. And I think the first thing I ordered from you was Be Your Own Bodyguard. And from that, I started following you on an old forum. I don't even remember what it was called, but I found out more about your work with fear. And so I sent you a note saying what would be appropriate to help my kids, because my daughter Elizabeth at that point, and by the way, I have her permission to tell these stories. It's just
Great.
so we're clear here. She was really pretty shy as a young girl, and really was pretty timid, frankly. She was afraid of a lot of different things that, to an adult seem rather silly. But they were things that she was really genuinely concerned about, that scared her. And I was wondering if your material might, I asked you at that point, what might be appropriate for me to pass on to her? What did you have that might be useful to her? And the cerebral self-defense audio tape was what you had mentioned. So I ordered it, and I listened to it, and I started teaching it to the kids. My daughter, Elizabeth, and my son, Brendan. Brendan didn't have the same temperament as Elizabeth. He was much more in your face and extrovert and all of those kinds of things. But the interesting thing was that for Elizabeth, I mean, as an example, I remember working with her about, she was very afraid that she was going into a concert in junior high playing flute. And she's a member of a flute section. I mean, it's not like anybody's really going to hear her individually playing, but she was really, really scared, her words, about the concert. So I used the false expectations appearing real acronym with her.
How old is she at this time?
She was probably 11, 12 years old.
Okay.
Something like that. So I used the false expectations appearing real acronym with her and helped her to work through that. A year later, or 2 years later, when she was 13, 8th grade, the school had a thing called a show choir. It was sort of a high-level musical thing that, the teachers would play the instruments and they'd invite kids in to do pop songs. And one night, one of the first rehearsals when Elizabeth was eligible for it, she actually volunteered to try a solo on a song she'd never known. She just didn't know the song. It was Hit Me With Your Best Shot, actually. And she actually did a really, really good job. And in a lot of ways, that event changed her life. Wow. The level of confidence that just exploded out of her was incredible. And, a lot of it, I am sure, goes back to false expectations appearing real. It was able to help her overcome her nervousness or fear of doing that.
Well, the acronym doesn't do it. That's amazing parenting and coaching. It's, as you know, this as a professor, as a teacher, there's got to be a story. There's got to be some sort of connection, or there is no retention. There's no interest in learning or applying and stuff like that. So, big kudos to you for having the, we all as parents, I've got 3 kids, we just assume, we love our kids. We want the best for them. We'll do, but a lot of parents have absolutely zero patience to really teach and work. It's more of that, why aren't you doing this, type thing. So, I want to, congratulate you on that. She's obviously, another thing is wants to learn. She was a sponge. She was, and people who are certainly with music, there's an adaptation that happens because it's math, it's notes, it's vibration, it does a lot to your brain. I mean, music's so undervalued and underrated and so important. And it should be mandatory that everyone figures out, whether, I don't care if you're beating on a tambourine, just something to get some music in your body would be really good. I was just writing something for some friends in the CrossFit community on fear yesterday. And I talking to that when you learn to look at fear and just stare it in the eyes, and what happens is if you're just willing to confront it, its hold on you loosens, because you realize that 99% of the time the fear was just simply imagined. It was the false evidence appearing real or the false expectations appearing real. That, the two acronyms that we popularized inside of psychobehavior and understanding, cerebral self-defense. And when I was writing this thing yesterday, and it's funny you bring that up, because I said, like, what will emerge is your true potential at the time of, like, relative to your skill set at the time, right? So if you're 8 years old, playing the flute, and you're scared, you can be 20 years old and you played the flute for like another 12 years and you're a master of it. You can still be scared. And it's looking at that fear. And that's what I see happen there. Was she just remembered something in your guidance and inspiration that just said, I'm going to go for this? Because it's very easy to go, I'll do a solo, but it's got to be something I've rehearsed, not something new, right? Like, there are a whole bunch of variables there. I have like goosebumps visualizing it, because it's just an exciting thing,
If I can continue with a couple more examples from Elizabeth that are, again, just utterly remarkable to me. Elizabeth was an academic star. She was really, really good. And she's currently in a PhD program at Notre Dame. I mean, she's smart. Wow. She got an offer for a full tuition scholarship at Brandeis, which is an elite university near Boston. And along with that, she got accepted at some other places. And I left it to her to decide which school she wanted to go to. Now, obviously, the best choice would have been Brandeis. But she told me at one point that she wanted to go to a small Midwestern school. It's a good school, but nowhere near the caliber of Brandeis. And I was a little disappointed, but I didn't say anything about it. I said, okay, well, if that's your decision, we'll go with that. And then she came to me that evening and said, I'm not sure. And I said, well, that's okay. We don't, you haven't committed to anything yet. Let's see what happens. Well, the next day she said, Dad, I've got to go to Brandeis. And that was exciting. I was glad about that. But later she explained why. Brandeis is a school that sort of prides itself on the fact that its student body is sort of in your face. They'll challenge their professors. They'll argue with them. They'll do all of these kinds of things. And that's not Elizabeth. She's still basically a pretty quiet kid. And she said she realized that the reason she didn't want to go to Brandeis was she was scared. Huh. And she realized that the only way she'd ever be able to overcome her fear was to confront it.
Nice.
And that's why she decided to go to Brandeis.
This is, if I interject here, because I feel like I'm at a seminar, right? And I want everyone. You and I are talking, but I'm conscious of everyone in the audience listening. And what I always talk about is that you really can't manage fear in your life if you don't also cultivate, develop, and respect self-awareness. And what she demonstrated there was a high level of self-awareness, because it's easy to rationalize. And you can put a hyphen between rational and lies, or keep it as one word. You can rationalize why you're not going to go to Brandeis. Why are you going to, I'm not doing this because, and like the excuse is the cognitive dissonance. It's like, I don't want to deal with it. Everything's okay. I'm going to make this is the right decision. It's whatever it is. The ability to actually, just kind of interesting, and it's serendipitous if the conversation goes there. I got a call from a private school today, a headmaster of private school, asking me about training staff, active shooter, active killer, and he had been referred to me, and what I talked about was self-awareness and fear management, that the first responder is going to be somebody in the school. It's not going to be a cop. It's not going to be EMS. It's not going to be a firefighter. And that nothing is going to happen if people don't understand how to manage fear, how to get to know fear. Again, KNOW, no misunderstandings there. There will always be scenarios where there are fear, but in order to get somebody even into a classroom to discuss fear, you need to somehow engender, inspire, or rely on self-awareness, because our unconscious bias prevents us from looking at stuff. So, like, amazing that she was able to, in a 24-hour period, regardless of however long it takes, to come back. And because she could have said, I'm going to go here because it's a more prestigious school and I want to, I want to have that diploma, not the diploma where people go, where's that? It could have been something like ornamental, but it was deep. And again, understanding the psychology of fear, I think, inspires a deeper level of self-awareness, and a deeper level of self-awareness allows you to navigate fear and make better choices.
Yeah. And, from that point on, in a lot of ways, for Elizabeth, it's been, there's been no turning back. She spent 6 months in China, some of it, at least one trip right on the North Korean border.
Wow.
When she graduated from college, she spent 3 years in Taiwan working there. Then she came back and is in a doctoral program now. I mean, so she's been, I would describe her as utterly fearless as a traveler.
Wow.
She is willing to put herself into all kinds of strange, difficult, uncomfortable situations. One of the things she's very proud of is she will eat anything you put in front of her. And in China, that means a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah. Like she's got me on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's eaten silkworms. I mean, just kind of on and on, all kinds of strange things. But now, again, one of the more interesting things when I was talking to her about being on the podcast and wanted to make sure I had her permission to tell the stories, one of the things she said that I needed to tell you is that the acronym false evidence appearing real has been really helpful to her lately because she's been having bouts of depression and anxiety.
Okay.
And she is able to look at those and say, this isn't real. It looks real, it feels real, but this just isn't real. Right. And so she's extending the things that she learned about fear and fear management into dealing with other issues well beyond just fear itself.
That's fantastic. It's and again, I said this earlier, but we haven't talked about you have 2 kids.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about your son, but her, like, and parents don't hear this enough, but what a great job you did. Right. And it's the one thing I remember. I've shared the story a couple of times. My son, when one of my gyms, we had an elevated ring, he was climbing up the ropes for the ring, and he was sitting on top of the foam corner of and it's very, like, it's a very precarious height. He was 4 or 5 years old, and had he fallen, because it was an elevated ring, he could have broken his neck, fallen off the side, hit the floor. And I was in my office, and all of a sudden I'm looking for him, and I look up, and he's sitting on the turnbuckle on the ring, like bouncing like, Dad, look at me. And I flashed to him falling, because it's like the soft foam top. And I was like, Nick, and I saw him like startle flinch, and he grabbed the ropes, and that actually triggered a balance issue for him, because I made his body lock up, and he wasn't like flowing like an athlete, and he almost fell because I got scared. And what I'd done is I transferred this sudden fear of heights to him. And I learned my lesson really quickly. I was like so horrified that I almost triggered that because of my own fear. And the background on that as a guy who studies and analyzes fear is I was a single dad who had custody of my son since he was a month old. So I was overly protective, and it was my first child, right? So I'm dealing with all of that stuff, and it's just hard to enmesh your professional. And I was still in my, this is like, he's 26 now. So this is, many, many years ago, where I was still exploring all of this stuff. But I learned my lesson really fast. One of my daughters, so, jump ahead, 6, 7 years later, I'm in Europe with my kids, teaching seminars. And one of my daughters is up on this adult or teenage outdoor, monkey bars type thing. But they were like for teenagers. It wasn't one of these like new age kids playground where everything's padded and everything. It was like there was no more paint left on this thing. It was up for, teenage, 12, 13-year-old kids. So I couldn't reach it. Like to get up, I would have had to jump up to grab on. She's climbing across the top like a bear crawl. And in the middle of the the middle of these, of the bars, she pauses and I see her body tighten up and I go, "Hey, Maddie, you okay?" And she goes, "Dad, I'm scared." And I'm like thinking, if she loses her balance here and falls down, that could, one of the bars could hit her in the throat, could knock her teeth out, bust her nose, right? Because she's up like this, like doing this bear crawl across like this horizontal ladder that's just got no padding on it. And I'm like starting, and then I remember what I did to Nick. And I go, "It's okay, you're fine. Hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to lower yourself down onto your stomach, just like you're going to do, like you're floating in the pool. Lower yourself down." And she interrupts me. She goes, "No, Dad, I want to keep going. I just wanted to tell you that I'm scared." And then she continues to move. And I was like, oh my God, like, what? How did she do that? It was like this pause, acknowledge the fear, start breathing again, decide, okay, which hand or which foot is going to move, get back into, the movement. And that's what I tell people, all movement is mental. The mind navigates the body. So you're just triggering all these old memories. Crazy. Your daughter's using this now. And it's funny, using the word stress and anxiety and depression. And I mean, the world is throwing so much shit at us. The type of information overload from email to smartphone shit to fake news to all sorts of stuff. Everybody, I think, is dealing with that type of thing. And we need to have, again, cultivate that self-awareness to step back. I do it on a regular basis where I'm just going, I can feel my nervous system just moving too fast for my brain. And I got to step back and turn the phone off or go for a walk or just shut that shit down. How is she doing anything? Like, is she doing okay with this? Yeah.
It's, like I said, she's the one who volunteered to me that perspective has been helping her cope with it, and she's doing fine. She's going to complete her degree in the. I assume she's on track to complete the degree in the usual amount of time and everything else, and she's got a good community around her, so that helps too. I'm sure.
I had last night. I went to my daughter's school, and they had a speaker there talking about parents and kids and stress and pressure and fear and all of that stuff. It was a really interesting talk, but please share. Do you have my personal information? If she wants to talk or dig a little deeper, and sometimes talking to a complete stranger about it, but she kind of knows me, even though we don't know each other, I'd be more than happy to jump on a call.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. No. Has your son or any more cool?
Well, I mean, Elizabeth has done just so many, especially with travel, she's done so many different things. It's just generally amazing. I think switching to Brendan, though, his use of the material was totally different.
Right.
And that's what, that again is one of these things that I find really interesting about it, that it's versatility. I mean, because Brendan applied it in a totally different way in his own life. Like I said, Brendan, unlike Elizabeth, who was, shy and, almost kind of withdrawn, Brendan was always very outgoing, and he's also somewhat more of a free spirit than Elizabeth is. Elizabeth tends to be much more by the book, first child. Brendan is, like I said, more of a free spirit. And the thing that was notable about Brendan from early on is he tended to befriend people who didn't have other friends.
Huh.
Yeah, I think he's got a strong empathetic streak to him. And so the people in school that were almost outcasts, although not quite, those were the people that Brendan would latch onto and like I said, befriend. And the interesting thing is that in junior high, the teachers and guidance counselors noticed this, and they started bringing Brendan in as sort of a peer counselor.
Oh, wow.
And he regularly would pass on the fear information that I got from you to the other kids as a way of trying to help them cope with their anxieties.
Wow.
So Brendan picked up on it and was using it to coach other kids.
That's pretty incredible.
In junior high.
Wow. How old is he now?
Brendan is 26.
Wow. What's he doing? What's he up to?
He's actually living in South Bend with Elizabeth and is currently working for FedEx as a courier.
Wow.
And then over the years, Brendan has as an example, he got into Boy Scouts because of one of his friends. He stayed with it, earned his way to an Eagle Scout, and did this despite the fact that in many cases he really didn't enjoy the activities that they were doing that much. But it was something that he knew was important. He knew he wanted to do it, so he went ahead and did it. And in many cases, again, these were, he was going on trips that really stretched him, that put him in places where he was just really uncomfortable. And he always managed to work through it, never had a problem with it. I strongly suspect it's because he internalized a lot of your materials again when he was in late elementary school and junior high while I was teaching it to Elizabeth.
Crazy. It's amazing. And it just for people who, listening and wondering what are these materials, and I want to, it's just an audio tape, but it was the way you obviously, you could have unconsciously, selfishly kept it for you, because of that vocation, your passion for martial arts. Hey, I'll check this guy out. And, there's a lot of people who are, they get it and they go, oh, I got a couple of things, and they look at it as like another tool in the toolbox, right? They don't see the transcendent application of it. And that's where I've always been with it. I mean, when I started our panic attack seminars in 1980, I called them the panic attack because we were doing these force on force seminars using like improvised gear. It was the Kyokushinkai, super safe, plexiglass helmet from Japan with Taekwondo chest guard and baseball shin guards and hockey gauntlets. I was from Montreal, Canada. We were just putting together this Frankenstein suit, and I had this intuition of like we should do a drill where we're not like tapping gloves or organizing a way to do one-on-one or multiple assailant or whatever. And so we started experimenting with these scenarios, and I noticed very quickly, it was almost like when the first UFC happened, right? 1993 in Denver, like it was always style versus style. Well, after 3 UFCs, it became mano a mano because there was no style really being, exemplified, with the exception of a few moves from jiu-jitsu, and things have evolved way since then. But what I want listeners to recognize, and we're talking about here, is that people had ideas of what they were going to do. And then when, Joe Louis, the famous boxer, said, and everyone thinks Mike Tyson said it, but it was Joe Louis who said, everyone has a plan until they get hit. And I call these things the panic attack because what I started doing is we had all these different martial artists and street fighters and people come in, and we said, look, here's the rules of engagement. And what do you think you're going to do if somebody attacks you? And we'd write down on index cards, like what our favorite moves were, what our go-to, and then when I started forcing people to actually reverse engineer a scenario, like you're not your style when you're at the ATM. You're not your style when you're, and it was interesting. So we called it the panic attack because people just freaking started to panic. That's where people don't know the origin of the name. Why did I call it the panic attack scenario? I mean, we weren't triggering, medical panic attacks, but it was like people just panicked and suddenly it was primal gross motor. And this is actually 7-8 years before developing spear system and understanding and starting to study the startle flinch. I didn't know what was going on. I was more narrating it, going, oh, like that move didn't work. Okay. All of this, and then I forget what triggered it, something we were talking about with it was just talking about how some people don't realize that how you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you think, and both of them together influence how you move. So in a vacuum, we can say, yeah, I'm going to go on this trip, and we're going to, like thinking of your son, hey, we're going to go, down, this river, or go camping here, or go here. But in real time, when you start to look at that, if you're afraid to travel, you're afraid of new places, or, whatever, the experience and even just going requires fear management. You mentioned that your daughter is fearless when it comes to travel. And I always picture the word fearless spelled with a hyphen, fearless, as opposed to fearless. Like your daughter strikes me. This is just philosophical semantics. So she's not fearless. She understands the fear. She mitigates the fear by having intelligent conversations. And she doesn't do reckless things, negligent things, because she understands fear and danger, which allows her to do things that other people who don't go, are you crazy? You went there? And again, it's semantics, but crazy stuff. We've been talking about your kids. Do you have any examples of how you've used it? And it's funny, before you answer, I use psychobehavior, the fear loop, the whole cerebral self-defense all the time. Still, I'm 57 now, and I use it all the time for myself. I don't, I'm not pulling it out and going, okay, where am I? Oh, I'm at motivation block 1. What's the scenario? It's so ingrained in me, but my self-awareness goes, man, you got a fear spike about this. Okay. You're a little apprehensive about this call, but you're prepared. And it's like your daughter doing the false evidence, false expectation. And when you start to analyze it at a cerebral level, what it does is it dilutes the emotional hold, because you understand the neural circuitry. You understand this flow of what it's trying to do. And I've used it to help raise my kids too. I'm afraid to talk to my kids about this right now. Okay, well, you're in the fear loop. Don't you teach that? Okay, here we go. So suddenly it's an orientation point. I know which direction I have to move. So, but you as we know how you used it as a dad with great success. What about you as a man, as a teacher, as a martial artist?
Most of my life is really pretty tame. Okay,
right.
But having said that, I have on occasion been put into situations where I've been on curricula, for example, videotape curricula with some really heavy hitters.
Right.
And as an academic, the last thing you want to do is to be put on a panel where you are clearly the least qualified person. Okay. This is just a scenario you don't want to be in.
Right.
And it is quite natural under those circumstances to become a bit nervous about the situation.
Of course.
But what happened with me, and this occurred on a couple of occasions that I can remember very, very distinctly. I looked at it and I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And then you just sort of push that aside. You sort of acknowledge it. You push it aside and you focus on the fact that worrying about it isn't going to make you do a better job.
In fact, it could have the adverse and opposite effect.
Exactly. So what I do under those circumstances is I use the fact that I am in this situation. I use the adrenaline that comes with it to help me perform better.
Nice.
I tell people all the time when I have students who are afraid to give presentations, look, stage fright isn't really fear. It's adrenaline going into your system, which you associate with fear, but really all it is energy.
Very good.
And so the energy your body is giving you the energy to enable you to do a better job.
I love it. And it's funny, serendipitously, this thing I was working on yesterday for CrossFit athletes. One of the lines in here is how fear can be used as a fuel to ignite your best performance. And it opens access to your true skill set, that the mind navigates the body. And it's the, it's something that I've gotten really passionate about in the last couple of years with this push for no fear, is that if as kids we had been taught, like your kids, to look at fear differently, we help self-actualize them. They're comfortable with challenges. They're not, especially in this, entitled generation where everything's a quick fix and stuff, and people don't have resiliency. We're not taught to be resilient. We're taught everyone gets a trophy and everyone wins and you could be anything you want. So it's interesting that by you teaching that to your students in your class, you're not just, depending on the depth of the lesson, but you're teaching them how to look at any challenge, not just public speaking or what have you. It's just, demystifying this. I remember, I grew up as an athlete and I grew up as a skier. And I never won a race, even though I was like the best skier on the team, because I would sabotage my performance when it came time to actually go. And I was so afraid to win and so afraid to lose that I always wiped out or skied off the course out of control. And I remember thinking, never talking about it, because it was like, the late 60s, early 70s. Even today, people don't know how to talk about fear and the psychology of fear, in my opinion. But I remember thinking to myself, because everyone was telling me, you're so good, you're going to win this. People thought I was going to maybe represent Canada in the Olympics. And I was like thinking, if I'm so good, why am I so scared? It was so incompatible and incongruous to me but no one ever explained what you did as a teacher. Hey, this is just, adrenaline racing through your nervous system because you want to do a great job. You're passionate. If you didn't give a shit about doing well or getting a good mark or doing a good speech, or if you didn't give a shit, you just go and you'd mutter through it. It's like people need to realize that adrenaline is a positive thing, and that fear can be like an enemy, an added weight, an emotional weight that just drags you down, or it can be fuel that ignites your best performance.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And, butterflies, butterflies in your stomach. It's just adrenaline.
Right.
It's just your body's response to give you energy so that you can do what you need to do. And again, the number of times that I've talked to students who were nervous about doing presentations. This is just a presentation in class with a bunch of their peers. This is not a big deal thing, but I've had so many students that were scared. And when you talk this through and explain it to them, often it helps. Not always, but often it does help. And it's something I apply myself. This isn't supposed to be about me coaching other people at this point. It's supposed to be about my own usage. But that's one of the big ones. I'll add one more. Just like everybody else, things go wrong in my life.
What?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe.
So weird, yeah.
But yeah, and sometimes they're kind of pretty serious things, car accidents or whatever. And I think this is partly from the fear management stuff I learned from you, just as I look at how my responses have changed over the years. I've gotten to a point where very often when these things happen, I'm able to look at them and say, okay, I didn't want this to happen, but it has happened. And now I've just got to deal with it and move on.
Yeah, there's
rather than letting the emotions or the disappointment or whatever derail me, just accept the fact of what has occurred. And now, all right, so now what do I do? It's always that, now what do I do? What is the proper response at this point?
Nice. Do you remember the golden rules discussed in the cerebral self-defense audio? Number one rule was accept what's happening. Acceptance was number one. Number two was get challenged. And number three was don't stop thinking.
Right.
Keep
And
that. Yeah.
I didn't remember those from the tape, but that's effectively, it got internalized
Right.
because,
Exactly.
like I said, over the years, I didn't used to respond this way. I used to sort of go
Nice.
off the handle, frankly.
Nice.
But over the years, that does seem to have gotten internalized enough so that it has totally changed the way I respond to those kinds of things.
It's so cool to hear. It's so cool to hear. Glenn, I've got to thank you, like, for sharing like family personal stuff. This is kind of an atypical podcast for us. Usually I've got, someone from the military, some law enforcement, some, like, well-known speaker or whatever. And I started a new series where I just wanted to talk to people that nobody knew. Right. And I say this tongue in cheek because individually everybody's a VIP in their own life. Right. But a lot of times on podcasts, it's somebody who's a bestseller. They're trying to sell a book or promote a service or whatever. And what I'm trying to do is just connect with people and hear these stories. And it's kind of cool just how intimate this is, that you even felt, that you should talk to your daughter and go, hey, are you okay? Because you could have not mentioned her name. You could have, it wouldn't have mattered anyhow. But I think that's a lot of integrity, and it means a lot to me, because the thing that's always impacted me, like when I started this call, is I've kept your email for 8 years, right? And I've read it at events where I can see, people are in there and they've got like this testosterone, it's a martial arts seminar. And I go, this is actually the most important stuff to me, is what our research is going to do to you emotionally, psychologically. Like the kicking and the elbows and the other stuff, you'll probably never even use that. It's fun to move and it's fun to play and it's fun to fantasize. But the most important thing that we can do is help you look at fear, because it's going to change how you navigate life. There's a confrontation every day, every week in our lives, right? And just how you just described, that used to, fly off the handle if there's something like, suddenly, happen, you would get upset about that. And now you're much more stoic and focused. And it's like, okay, this just happened. What would be the most strategic thing I could do here? You're maybe not that robotic or automaton with it, but there's a moment where you take a deep breath, you go, okay. And you're doing kind of like this, now it's damage control and strategy. So it's fascinating to hear.
Tony, if I may, the context of that letter I sent you was you were running a contest,
right?
Where what was the most important thing you learned from your materials, and it was going to be a free, you were going to pay the tuition to go to your summer camp.
Summer camp, yeah.
And I couldn't go. I knew I couldn't go because my schedule just wouldn't permit it. But it seemed to me that was really the perfect opportunity to let you know just how valuable what you do was to me and to my family in a totally different context from what I assumed most people would be talking about. So that's why I sent you that letter, because, frankly, I don't think people, and this is another hint on a totally different subject, but I don't think people express appreciation very much. I think it's important for us to acknowledge the good things other people have done for us, and it's important for them to hear what it is that they have done for us. It's important to get that, and that's a deeply held value for me. So I appreciated the opportunity to send you the letter. It
to this day means a lot to me, and I keep it highlighted, because there's days where, for the exact reason that you just mentioned, where, I was joking if I could monetize the haters, where you just, like, there's days where you go, why do I even do this? Like, I just, and then I go, oh, Glenn's letter. right? And other letters like that. But you're right. As a society, most people, and it's why it's fear. If I unpeel, every onion, like, hey, why didn't you say thank you? Why didn't you say love you? Why didn't you say sorry? Why didn't you? When you peel and you get to that core of it, well, I was afraid, and if we all get to no fear, KNOW fear, we become better people. And I'm going to wrap it up here on that note, sir. I would love for you to get to the camp one of these years. Please, that invitation to come as my guest is always there. I know with your schedule, maybe now that the kids are out of the house, you can free up some time. But if you can ever get to one of our gigs, hit me up and you can come in as my guest.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Have a great day. Please pass on my best to your children. And if they ever, your adult, they're adults now.
They're still my kids.
Yeah, this is true. It just sounded like they were 8 and 12 when I said it in my mind, which is how I obviously will. I'll meet them one day and go, you're much bigger than the 12-year-old your dad described in the letter. But again, if your daughter wants to talk offline, I'd be more than happy to. And if I can ever do anything for you guys, please let me know. And I look forward to meeting you live at a camp one of these days.
Thanks a lot, Tony.
Take care, Glenn.
Bye-bye.